Lawyers and police officers of Reddit. What is the dumbest reason you've seen someone get arrested? Someone in my town crashed into a telephone pole and took out the power. The road was closed off while things were sorted out. One lady decided she couldn't take the long way home and crashed into the same telephone pole. She was arrested for drunk driving. I arrested a guy who continually called 911 asking police to bring him weed and a cheeseburger. He then proceeded to eat the foam padding of my roll bars in the back seat. I've never seen someone trip so bad. He could have called any other number and had a completely different night. I know how annoying it is when people do this, but I'm not a lawyer or a police officer. But I do know the dumbest crime I've ever heard of. My dad's helmet from university. A young man, walking home from a night out, passed a bus depot and decided to take a bus for a spin, help people get home, etc. Upon return to the bus depot, he was arrested on a few charges including drink driving, endangering the public, and a weird form of theft as he returned it without prompting. Following the charges, he was released awaiting trial, likely going to receive a nasty slap on the wrist, some fines, maybe a short prison stay, and a suspension of his driving license. Not long before the trial, he needed a good night out with friends, and he walked home past that same bus depot. It was just too tempting. He served 2 years. You'd think they would have improved security at the bus depot after the first incident. In the 1980s I was a detective in Cape Town. One day while driving in Woodstock we saw a group of people chasing a man, so we assisted. Turned out he was suspected of stealing from a passenger in a third-class train carriage. Those are very crowded with many passengers standing close together. In his pocket he had a pay envelope from a local fish packing place, containing no money but a piece of carton in which was written, "Haha, lekker jeving, Afrikaans for lol caught you good." The people giving chase insisted that he had pickpocketed someone on the train and jumped out at Woodstock station. Long story short, we traced the owner of the pay envelope. His name and employee number were on the envelope, who said that after being pickpocketed twice before and losing a week's wages, he hid his money in his sock and made a decoy with the top of a pack of 30 cigarettes on which he wrote the Afrikaans taunt. The culprit was convicted of theft of an envelope valued at 15 cents and ended up with a criminal record. Can't recall what the sentence was, unfortunately. I was on a ride along. Guy gets pulled over, hands his brother's ID to the officer. It is not a good match. Officer asks him when he was born. He gets that one right. Asks him how old he is. He's off by 2 years. He's being put in the car and the officer says, "You're the first guy I've arrested for bad math." Work for a smaller county. Last fall we got a group of people coming me down from a nearby city to rob a hemp farm, thinking it was weed growing along the highway. Several of the crack team of bandits were arrested and lodged. The kicker is it was explained explicitly how dumb it was, that you can't even get high of the stuff. But the very next weekend they came back down and tried to pull it off again. Only this time the farmer was home and ended up holding them all at gunpoint till we arrived. Not a cop or a lawyer, but I knew a guy in high school who got arrested for impersonating a police officer and pulling over a real-life off-duty cop who also happened to know him from high school and found him pretty easily because of that. I never understood why people do this. What is the purpose of pretending to be a cop? Does it give them some sort of power trip or something? Usually, they were ejected from the police academy for being too power hungry, so they try to make up for it by pretending that they didn't get kicked out. There's also the people who use it as a way to steal things. Much like someone waiting until you go on vacation to break in and steal your sh, they just go up to you and pretend to be a cop and steal your sh. I work in police dispatch. You would be surprised how many people with warrants call and request officers to come to their house for unrelated things. Guess they just assume the officer won't run them. Edit. My favorite instance of someone shooting theirself in foot was just a couple weeks ago though. Someone calls up and says that another mom at the park is screaming at her kids and would like an officer to come talk to her. I smiled to myself, told the woman I would get someone headed over. Officers got on scene and sent everyone home because the park is closed due to COVID. Not me, but when my husband was arrested, he was out on his boat fishing and forgot his life jacket in the truck. Game warden wrote him a ticket, told him he didn't have to appear in court, and to come to the courthouse on the date listed to pay the ticket. Cool, no big deal. The day came for my husband to pay the ticket. He was in the area for work, so he figured he would pop in instead of driving back out there. About 45-minute drive. He went in to pay the ticket, gave it to the girl so she could process it, and she said, "You can't pay this. There is a warrant out for your arrest." My husband was extremely confused and no one would say anything to him about what was going on. A 60-year-old sheriff came over and handcuffed him. While the sheriff was walking him across the road to the jail, he finally explained it to my husband. There was a warrant out because he failed to appear in court. Remember, the game warden said he didn't have to appear in court and even checked on the ticket that he did not have to appear. My husband told the sheriff that and the sheriff knew. He also knew this particular game warden. According to the sheriff, this was not the first time this had happened. I ended up bailing him out and he was on probation for a year. This is such bullshit. The sheriff knew. Not arrested, but I gave someone an unnecessary ticket. I drove past two girls on a sidewalk and one was holding a beer can. I backed up and pulled up next to them, but now the beer was gone. I ask the girl where it went and she denies having a beer. I tell her to get it and dispose of it. She tells me she's 22 anyway. I respond, great. No reason to get in trouble for alcohol. Just go get the can and properly dispose of it. She denies it again. Again I tell her to just throw it away. Her friend tells her just go get it. She still denies ever having a beer. I walk a few feet back to where I saw them and surprise, there's a beer can on the ground. She got an open container ticket at 22 and a warning for littering. The worst part is after she got the ticket she asks what if I was holding it for my friend because she's not 21. I tell her I wouldn't throw my friend under the bus since she was the one in possession when I saw them, so it wouldn't have mattered. She still didn't seem to grasp that nobody had to get in trouble if she'd just picked it up. TBF to a dumb kid. That probably sounded like entrapment. Just go pick up that open can of alcohol and I swear I won't give you a ticket. I would have doubts myself. We never arrested him, but I investigated a fraud where a guy called our department that issue licenses to captain oil tankers etc. When they told him he didn't have enough evidence of previous sea experience, he literally emailed in a photograph of him sat at his computer forging a sea service testimonial for his last company and asked, "Is this okay?" I was part of our law enforcement unit and we agreed we needed to ask Parliament to add a new merchant shipping offense for being a total effing idiot. Obligatory. Not a lawyer or a cop, but my fiancé is a cop in a major US city. One of his fellow, very overzealous, officers arrested a homeless guy on Christmas Day because he fell asleep in the park. The park closed at 11 PM, so he broke the law. Yeah, everyone gives the officer sh for it still to this day. My sister was a legal assistant for a while when she was in school. She went to a hearing with her lawyer and the judge asked the defendant, "And how much marijuana did you have on you?" To which the defendant responded, "Oh no, your honor, it was coke." Not entirely sure how that got messed up, but the judge apparently gave the look of how effing stupid are you. I am pretty sure kidnapping a man and his pet goat from a pawn shop is right up there. I am not a police officer, but I have a friend living in my basement who was arrested and charged for assault with a weapon. The weapon in question was a tomato. He threw it at his girlfriend and she called the cops and pressed charges. He pleaded guilty and is now on probation for 12 months. What an absolute cartoon. Imagine getting into a fight with your girlfriend and trying to break up by booing and throwing tomatoes at her like some heckler from 1850, and then getting weapon charges. My dad once got arrested because he didn't believe the cop in Civis was a real cop, so he slapped him. Turns out he really was a real cop. Your dad knows he can't slap people even if they aren't cops, right? Sticking a damn pineapple up his A and then walking into Walmart naked with the pineapple still up in his cheeks. No wonder SpongeBob lives in Bikini Bottom. I am neither a lawyer or a police officer, but when I read this question, I remembered something my coworker said. She's a boomer. Her son is in his 30s, and in his early 20s, he had a heroin problem. His mother could always tell he was high, because he would clean and clean and clean when he was high, and sit around and do nothing when he was not. Well, it was time for another hit, and he had already pawned everything else of value in the house. So what does he do? Go to his poor old elderly neighbor's house, breaks into the garage and steals shit there. Cops are called. I think another neighbor spotted him and called, but the elderly neighbor didn't want to press charges. Heroin addict showed remorse enough so that the elderly neighbor believed him. That and the addict cut the elderly neighbor's lawn all the time. So it was all good, except for the heroin addict wasn't having that This man who had an otherwise clean record felt guilty enough, and still high enough I guess, that he asked the officers to continue with pressing charges on himself. Everybody else was okay with the kid getting off scot-free. The officers explained to him that he would be charged with a crime and that this was serious. He more or less told the cops that he had done wrong and wanted to pay for his mistake. It was something expensive he tried to steal, so it was counted as a felony, I think. The breaking and entering thing was something he was also charged with. Dude spent almost 7 years in prison. He is still on probation today. This dude that had a clean record defed himself all up because he basically wanted to. Not me, but my grandma was a lawyer. She had to defend someone who stole from a store in a city in Hungary around midnight. The only reason they got caught was because they used a match to light up the place, and that set the fire alarm off. As if that wasn't enough, a few weeks later in court, my grandma tells the judge to look at the kid, how young he was and that he couldn't have been strong enough to break open the door or carry something outside and steal it. At this point the defendant stands up, points at his muscles and shouts, "Hell yeah, I could." That's basically when my grandma gave up. As far as I know, he got a few months in prison. I used to work at a juvenile detention center. We had a local police department bring in a 10-year-old boy for hitting his house with a broomstick. Oh god, where to start? The $30 worth of knickknacks someone stole from Walmart? The guy who robbed the gas station down the road from his grandma's, where the teller recognized his voice and called him out by name. The assault with a weapon where the weapon was a frozen poultry, my personal favorite. Or the nurse who decided to use her client's debit card as petty cash, probably the last one. Woman was 5 years from retirement and will never work as a nurse again.